So, very warm welcome. I'm based here in the UK today. It's semi-sunny here, not as warm as many you might calling from today, but today it's a pretty nice day here in north of England. Again, thank you so much for everybody joining this session today. My name is David Cliff, and thank you for taking that time out. Again, it's a busy time of the year, especially in the industry working, where people might be traveling, focusing on recruitment efforts. So, thank you so much. This session forms part of SAM's global webinar series for 2026. Essentially, a series designed to provide practical insight and support for international student recruitment agencies and also university partners as well. Each session focuses on different themes that matter across the recruitment journey, putting the student at the heart of the discussion and helping to try and improve consistency, strengthen collaboration, and support more effective and sustainable partnerships. In the earlier sessions this year, we've explored several key areas shaping the sector. In January, we looked at involving the compliance landscape just to open up the main topic into this sort of industry and then focusing on oversight and accountability within that session. Then moving into February, we explored student journey consistency, looking at how alignment across that recruitment process supports smoother admissions and better student outcomes. And then last month, we focused on agent performance and partnership models, exploring how universities evaluate partnerships with agencies and just beyond, not just beyond enrollment numbers, but other aspects as well. Today's session builds on these themes, shifting slightly towards that operational process where what sits underneath the performance and consistency and how agencies can protect themselves from operational risk. Before we do get into framing the topic, just a quick update. I know my colleague Sham has already pointed a few things out. We have muted your on entry. It's nothing personal. It's just so that we don't get noise interruption. Again, I appreciate some of you might be logging in from a busy office environment. The chat is open. Please feel free to say hello and where you're from. You don't have to either. It's completely up to you. Please stay engaged throughout if you can. And any questions, please feel free to post in the chat. We will be doing a few poll questions later on as well throughout the session. We do always aim to leave around at least 10 minutes at the end for audience questions, but we do pop in a few questions as well throughout the session if they are, pretty pertinent and just will add to the flavour of this discussion already going on between myself and the panelists. The session is being recorded, and with that, we'll aim to try and get the copy of this or a link to download it at a later stage today or in the next few days, so you can access it at your own accord. And also, everybody can't join the session at the same time due to work matters. So let's get started. So I just want to set things up with today's topic first before I introduce the panel. So as you've noticed already, we're signing up to this session. The session is called Protecting Your Agency from Operational Risk. There's a significant pivot towards agency on this particular session compared to others. Now, the reason why this topic really matters and why we've chosen it is because operational risk in agencies rarely comes from one major issue. More often, it develops gradually through everyday processes, whether it's manual tracking, maybe inconsistent staff practices, maybe gaps in communication, sometimes lacking certain structured workflows. And over time, those small gaps could possibly lead to errors, delays, miscommunications with students or universities, and obviously increased operational pressure, and in some cases, potential reputational impact. At the same time, recruitment agencies are managing increasing volumes, multiple markets, and growing expectations around consistency and reliability. So it is tough. But this session is really about understanding where operational risk comes from, how it impacts performance and trust, and what practical steps recruitment agencies can take to reduce it. And increasingly, what we're seeing is that agencies with more structured and centralized ways of managing their processes, even relatively simple ones, are better positioned to maintain consistency, reduce errors, and operate more confidently. However, before we begin and get into the meat of the questions, let me introduce today's excellent panel. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by two well-experienced voices from across the sector. So I'll introduce their names, but I'll get them to introduce their roles and where they come from. So first of all, Kevin Dunn from the University of West of England. Good morning, and if you can please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Well, it's more of an afternoon from me. So for those that speak Thai, Sawasdee Krap, I'm joining you today from Thailand. So I've spent, and I had to check LinkedIn to verify this, I've spent the past 21 years in the student sector. starting in student accommodation. And then following an interview in central London, I joined student recruitment 17 years ago, where my focus has always been primarily Asia Pacific, including China and India. So my responses today will take a slight APAC slant, because, of course, there are different challenges in different parts of the world. Along the way, I've undertaken consulting projects for UCAS, a Thai edtech startup, a Malaysian agency, set up an international office in Singapore. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion, and I hope I can add some degree of practical insight, but I do warn you, with an Asia Pacific slant.
Thank you very much for joining, Kevin. I forgot, yes, you're based in Thailand, so yes, afternoon to you, and you've wealth of experience there, so I'm sure you'll provide lots of great insights and guidance to our audience. So thank you for joining. And last but certainly not least, good morning. I believe it's morning. I assume you're obviously in the UK today, Tony. So this is Tony Lee from ISEF. Good morning and welcome.
Thanks ever so much, David. Yeah, I'm back in the UK. A little bit jet lagged. Just arrived back in the UK as jet lag is something I think we all deal with all the time. So yeah, much like Kev, I've done 2 decades in this industry, and I traditionally came from the student recruitment side, where I worked with inter-university partnerships and study group, and a multitude of university partners that work within those pathway providers. So recruiting students into Australia, the US, a little bit New Zealand, a lot in the UK. And all of that has been working with agents. And for the last 5 years, I've been working with ISEF. And I'm quite proud of the work that we do with ISEF, and which I think is pertinent to this particular webinar, because at ISEF, we do everything we can, I think, to really champion the great work that agents do around the world. And we are always on hand to try and help agencies raise professional standards, and prove those professional standards with the work that we do at ISEF Academy. So very much looking forward to this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Much appreciated. And obviously, guys, absolutely incredible experience. So we're going to have a really great chat today on today's topics. So just before we can continue, and just a brief introduction about me, if you don't know me, I'm the Business Development Manager at SAMS Global, focusing on primarily our SAMS CRM platform, which is designed to support recruitment agencies managing student applications and improving operational structure. And then before joining SAMS, I spent a good number of years working international student recruitment for a UK university, where I mainly focused on Africa, Middle East, focusing on partnerships, obviously recruitment, and much more. So I have a lot of first-hand experience on operational processes and consistency in communication, both with impact on performance and partnerships. However, let's get started. Again, we've already 10 minutes into the session, so let's get straight to question one. Okay, so again, might jump into some ad hoc questions later on from the audience today, so keep them coming through to the chat. So the first one is, and I'll put this into the chat as well. I'll copy and paste my questions in the chat so you're made aware of them. The first one is, what are the most common operational risks recruitment agencies today might face in the recruitment environment? So I'll repeat that again. What are the most common operational risks student recruitment agencies might face in today's recruitment environment? And as Kevin, it's your first time on the panel, over to you first, Kevin, if you don't mind, on this one. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. When I saw this question, it's a really difficult one to answer because, as I said from the outset, I'm going to have a slant towards Asia Pacific. And as I look at the markets that I look after, those operational risks can vary from country to country. Even within India, for example, they can vary from state to state, from city to city. So I tried to find more of a generic example. And from a university perspective, it's inconsistency. But I'm sure that's often reciprocal to universities, where you get a different answer depending upon who you speak to. But that inconsistency can be around counsellor quality, document handling, communication, or sometimes the risk of over-reliance on good and strong counsellors. And whilst counsellors to the UK should have completed the BC training, there is no guarantee that the counsellor in front of the student is necessarily BC trained. To a degree, there's an assumption, or have even completed university training. At UE a little while ago, we launched some online training to help agents mass adopt that training process. But the adoption was relatively low. When I look at the numbers globally, it was probably 5 to 10%. So we very quickly pivoted back to traditional in-person training, or sometimes targeted online training. But there is an opportunity to fix some of this. Within an agency, there are so many stakeholders, and I think universities often forget this, but I think, again, it's reciprocal. Within an agency, you have your admissions officers. We very rarely train them. What we do is we train the counselors and assume that that information filters down. You often have a finance team who deal with both student payments and commission payments. And again, we have that discussion 9 times out of 10 with the counsellor or the agency owner, depending upon the size of the team. You have a marketing office, so do we. But often these are not necessarily connected. But of course, all universities as well have a compliance team. Many agencies have a compliance team that sometimes sits within admissions, but often it can sit separately. But these are not interconnected because ultimately what you have at a university is an account manager, an international officer. Within an agency, you have a counsellor, which we see as an account manager as well. But also you have conversion teams. You have a HR department that we could work with because as a university, we could train you. So one of the biggest challenges that I think that exists here is fundamental rather than a specific issue in relation to, the changing BCA requirements. It's actually the connectivity between university and the agent or the institutional partner. But I think there's a quick fix: introductions. So that would fix it for me. The issue is the connectivity rather than a filtering process that goes through an individual and then out to the branch within a university, but it's creating a more connected, multi-stakeholder approach that doesn't just reduce inefficiencies. For me, it creates a real opportunity to improve as well. Consistency, speed, because no longer am I filtering those emails across to the relevant department. It means your department is speaking directly to mine. But also, I think we both grow with it as proposals and ideas come forward, because as we evolve in student recruitment, so do our agent partners. And I think often there's best practice that goes both ways. It's not just about us learning, it's also about you learning. And I'm sure 9 times out of 10, your systems are often more efficient. So for me, the answer is quite simple fundamentally, but I do know the question can go in a million directions and be much more specific than that. But I do think once those departments are interconnected, then the compliance team can deal with the BCA metrics and compliance issues. The admissions team can speak with the admissions team as well. So for me, in essence, it's fundamentally connectivity to the right stakeholder across institutions and agent organizations.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I think that's a really interesting point. I know Tony's very much of the same like-mindedness you are. We've had good chats about digitization and tech. We're all a bit of tech heads here on the call today. And it's really interesting. And obviously, we'll talk about digitization more later on with a few questions I've got lined up. But it's kind of funny, isn't it? You've got to start with human interaction. And that it's a really good point you've made there. And it's one I haven't really thought about that much. And putting my old student recruitment hat on, you're right. Often everything relies upon those two key parties who represent both the agency and the university, where it's the international officer like myself and potentially the counsellor, and everything behind that, whether you say it could be finance, compliance, accommodation, whatever it might be, is often, at least that beginning of the journey, comes through those singular parties. Where it's a very good point you made there, where maybe we need to align the key people who represent those key departments. Just on that point, and before I pass over to Tony on this question, is have you tried to make that step to connect? And if you haven't, I imagine it's quite not an uphill battle, but it's going to be difficult to try and pull off.
It's very, very difficult. I mean, as I'm sure everybody on the call are aware, at the moment, we're trying to get agents on CAS. And even that in itself, just to get agent addresses with all the different branch offices, organizations operate in very different ways. A small, an SME would have probably 1 or 2 people within the organization that would deal with pretty much everything that we discuss. But as soon as you get to the larger organizations, which are becoming the majority these days, it is incredibly difficult. So we did send out, it was about a year to 18 months ago, to try and track down the different stakeholders. And one of the things we found was that churn of staff made it incredibly difficult because there's certain roles within what we do, like admissions. I started in admissions many years ago. It's a very repetitive role, so it has a high turnover of staff. So the moment you get contact details for an admissions person, and sorry, I am generalizing a little bit here, within 18 months to 2 years, that's incorrect. So whilst it's an ideal where you've got an agency owner that operates and manages the business, it's easy. But as soon as you go to an agency that's 100 plus students, that's very complex and forever changing. It's never fixed. Unless everybody has a marketing at SAMS global email address, that individual's forever changing, sadly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I can, again, sorry, Tony, we'll definitely bring in 2 seconds, is that I absolutely agree on that. And this is something we'll definitely touch upon later with systems, because I'm very much more on the agent side at the moment. I speak with agents day to day regarding systems. And I think the key word here is consistency. Like you say, there is unfortunately that sense of churn. Staff come, staff go, but again, we'll focus on this more later. If you've got a system in place, whether it is a digitized system, then if there are people coming in and out, at least there's a central system of logging of that interaction or development of student journeys. But really good, lots of stuff to unpack there, but we'll come back to a few of those points later, Kev. Tony, over to you on this particular question. Just to add in, what's your thoughts on, just to get things rolling on this particular
Yeah,
question?
I think I'm probably reiterating a lot of what Kev said there, because I think what we've seen is this kind of evolution of expectation, from the student coming through the door and their
Mm.
parents. They've got very high expectations of what they're expecting the agency to deliver, what they want from their counsellor. And then that moves all the way through from the admissions officer, who these days has a very high expectation of the quality of application they're going to receive, right the way through to the compliance officer that has very, very high expectations of understanding exactly who's behind the agency, the level of transparency they want to see, all the way through to ownership and the right type of bank account used, the right type of documentation. All of this has evolved and certainly improved in recent years. And that expectation now carries through to this new age of compliance, all the way through to UKVI and expectations. So we're seeing this constant raising of expectation all the way through, and the agency is having to deal with that. And so I suppose to the heart of your question, where does the operational risk come from? It comes from, as Kev mentioned, you might have high staff turnover, and now there's an expectation that not only should everybody be trained, but they should be able to evidence that training. People expect counselling so that the right fit student is sent to the right institution for the right reasons. And on the other side of that, we've got financial pressure, that comes from potentially in-market staff. It might come from the recruiters. It might come from incentives that are being put in place. So all of that's happening. And in the middle of that is, I think, agencies that are largely trying to do the right thing with their heart in the right place to make sure the student ends up on the right course, that they get the right student outcome. But there's a lot of pressure coming at you from all angles there in terms of do the right thing on multiple pages. And in the middle of that, we have to accept the fact that there can be a high staff turnover when it comes to counsellors, and they shouldn't just be doing the British Council course. They should be doing ethical selling courses. They should be doing individual brand level training. And you want to make sure that every student that comes through is being counselled by somebody that is adequately trained. And that, I think, is the real pressure. And I don't think anybody should be under any illusion of how tough a spot that puts both agents and counsellors in right now.
No, absolutely. And just on, that's a really good point. And then just taking it back to Kev as well on this, do you see sort of these risks becoming more visible to the university side of it? Things, Kev, are things becoming more sort of open on risks? Do you think they are building up as years go by, or they always been
Uh,
there in that sense?
Wow. When I go back 17 years ago, when I used to catch a flight to India to collect bank drafts, it's a very different place. So, yes, the environment has changed. Risks have increased. I think agents more and more are understanding those risks and they are trying to work with us. There's often an incompatibility of technology and how we communicate with each other. But we do see it, but I am scared of the repeated discussion of risk. And it's all around data. The more data we see, the more problems we find. But I do think it's important that when we do discuss that risk, we also discuss the opportunity and we look at both ends of the data. So one of the things we're looking at UE in terms of our agent management project is around how do we celebrate the success and not just look at the problems. And it's just terminology around, instead of saying visa refusal rates, let's change it to visa success rates. So for me, it's important that, yes, we discuss risks in a positive light. In the My expression that I always use, it's the nature of the beast. Sometimes things go wrong. As long as we can fix it together, let's crack on and start supporting the next student. But is it more visible very much so, because of course it's cascading down from Wheeler and government organizations that's pushing the mandate across more and more to universities to ensure that we are compliant, not just at, of course, application and enrollment, but throughout that student journey. And I think that's fair to some extent, that those responsibilities are shared with our agent partners wherever we can.
No, that's a really good point. I think we'll come back to shared responsibility later, but yeah, thanks on that. And just one final point back to you, Tony, on this is that from a sector-wide view, especially from the agency sector, do you feel these potential risks are consistent across markets, or is it like a standard sort of risk approach of what
No,
these are,
I
or do you
think
feel it changes over the different sort of areas of the world and markets?
I think we're seeing different behavior in different markets. I think, when we look at there's a desire, I think, for transparency. We're certainly investing a lot in technology that helps bring that transparency to both sides, both parties. We want to
Mm.
see, I know, Kev, you saw the work that we were doing a while back on the due diligence tool and enabling us to take a different view of the agents. And where I think that's important is in certain markets, we're seeing more and more sub-agent use. We're seeing more and more master agents that may be working with multiple aggregators that are sending students into pathway providers before they then reach the university. So there may be, several parties involved in a single student journey, and there's an expectation of transparency through that entire network and that journey. And, Kev mentioned there, the transparency between different structures where there may be branch offices and different sub-agents involved. And that can all get quite murky. And there's a lack of understanding in some places from an institutional level of what that looks like.
Mm.
And of course, that sort of convoluted journey can be very different in very different parts of the world. We see quite different behavior, between onshore agents versus, parts of South Asia where there's, the evolution of the agent model has moved, I think, quite differently in different parts of the world.
No, absolutely. No, thanks for that, Tony. Yeah, some really good points there. And I think when you touch upon the sub-agent factor, that's actually going to be our next month's webinar. We're going to have a deep dive on sub-agent networks, but that's definitely something we need to explore in more discussion at the next session. Just moving on to the next question, if you don't mind, guys. And again, I'll go back to you, Kev, on this one. What types of operational gaps tend to raise immediate concerns or potentially reduce confidence in partnerships?
Oh, wow. Such a
And
broad
it's a big one.
question.
Sorry, I know.
Yeah. I
Sorry,
know
man,
there
big one
is
that.
the request from agents. I was out in India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka recently, and as part of our tours, we always have live surveys to get a feel of what the market needs. And what the market wants is quick turnaround. So that's it. It means if I get the offers out, then everybody's happy. But I don't think that's always true. I think it's important for universities to be clear and consistent within their messaging. I think it's important that agents and universities are responsive. I mentioned earlier, sometimes things go wrong, but that's life. And I think it's important for universities to not then layer processes and agents. It sometimes goes wrong, the nature of the beast, excuse the repetition. Let's move on from it, but learn from it. But as I look at operational risks, again, we look at the BCA metrics and everything else, but I come back to the fundamentals that I think are very wrong. We've been communicating for this session today via email. But if I communicate via an email with a student, it's often not read. So I think one of the major operational risks that's not being looked at the moment is what I've discovered recently is that my team in India basically convert everything from email to WhatsApp. In Vietnam, it's often on Zalo. Of course, China is WeChat, and that's the primary recruitment tool. So I think there's often a gap in terms of it's a major operational risk, because as soon as you move information from one place to another, that's where human error starts to come about. So the team in India, they have WhatsApp groups for their agents. So it's a great communication channel. But also, I know agents that communicate solely with their students on Instagram and TikTok. So what they're doing is they're taking my lengthy message and they're condensing it down, thus moving or losing a lot of the key messages within that. And it just doesn't get translated to the student. So what we're doing with the different types of communication is we're almost making it manual. We're creating a manual process in order to transfer that over. And I think that's an undiscussed, rather large operational risk. And it does come back to institutions. How can we better communicate on platforms that are appropriate for the end user, for the student? How do students want to be communicated with? But also, do we communicate across multiple platforms? Would it be WhatsApp for informal messaging, but does the offer letter always need to remain on email? But again, I know in China, students don't read their email, so we convert it to WhatsApp. So I know that there are some major operational risks around the BCA, but I come back to some of the basics in terms of what's the preferred method of communication? How can we record that so we've got a consistent track record of what the communications have been with that student? Because I'm somebody that looks at data quite often, but there's so much data in so many silos capturing different types of data. What we don't have is a full history, at least at my university, of what's happened with that particular student on that journey. You've got an application system, but then you've got email, which is corresponding. So operationally, I think the biggest challenges which are not discussed are how and where we communicate. And I think that does reduce confidence. Because if a lengthy message from a university, and the reason why it's lengthy is because we need to make sure that we give the student everything they may possibly need in every eventuality. But I think often what our partners do is they make it appropriate for that platform, which I fully understand and appreciate. But some of the key messages, and sometimes, let's say, the terms and conditions, are not then shared on that. So it's a rather basic element, but I think it's quite important because then it leads into everything else that we're sharing, both with students and our agent partners.
No, absolutely, Kev. I can absolutely feel that pinch point there, not just from my recruitment days, but even now. I think that sense of transparency of communication and messaging is key. Look, we appreciate that different markets have different focus on platforms and not one size fits all, but you are right, like that you might send one email out, it might be quite lengthy, but there might be some essential information about enrollment in there, like certain dates and times and deadlines. And if that is unfortunately just not quite put across in the right way, it might have a great knock-on effect later. So I completely sympathize with that, but I also sympathize on the other side as well, and using of certain channels which help with communication to their clients. This is a big one, this, Tony. What's your thoughts on this? And thanks, Kev, for your input on there. Thank you.
I mean, I think it probably speaks a little bit to the same issue as that kind of management of social media. You want to be able to manage that data, and I think it bleeds into a degree of reputation management, and the idea that you've got clients, you've got students, and you want them to have a good service. You want them to be good advocates for the service that you provided, and you want that advocacy to carry through. And I think we see this with good quality agents all the time, is that we see the relatives of those students go through the same agent channels that their cousins and their aunties and uncles did and things like that, because agencies build up good rapport with the families of the students that they serve. And I think being able to amplify that testimonial, that authentic advocacy is very key for agencies. And I think also managing any poor reputation. We've all had the situation, we've all seen TripAdvisor reviews where you get, one disgruntled person that can cause you quite a lot of problems on social media and digital and things like that. And I think it's important to stay on top of all of that. And I think it's important to differentiate yourself as we get into this more transparent way of working. It means that we do have to, I suppose, raise our professional standards. Where historically it may have been okay for an agency to trade out of a personal bank account, but that's becoming less and less viable. It may be okay that the company trades under four different trading names and maybe has a director that's maybe not a director anymore, still listed on the company. But all of that is becoming more and more transparent as we move into this next phase, this next stage. And I think for good agencies, it means that compliance is, yeah, okay, compliance can be a difficult thing, but it can also be a real differentiator in the marketplace. And I think as we came out of the pandemic, we saw a post-pandemic surge. We saw a lot of new entrants into the market, particularly in certain parts of the world. And some of those entrants to the market weren't the most professional agents that we've all seen. And we all know that there's been that surge. We know that there has been unintended consequence of some platforms that have, if you like, generated a lot of new entrants to the market. And I think the next stage that we're going to go through means that professional agencies will differentiate themselves from those. And I think there'll be multiple ways they'll do that. And I think the use of good social media, good data governance, ensuring that you can present yourself as as an adept professional company that does the right thing by students and evidence that, it's going to be ever more important.
No, absolutely, absolutely, some good points there, Tony. And I think adding this element of potential immediate concern and reducing confidence. And back to you on this, Kev, are there any? We've talked about the communication side of things, which is a great example, but what triggers concern early on for you as a working for a university? Are there any particular triggers that you think, not the red lights going off, but you think, okay, there might be some concerns here or potential gaps in the operations of potential partners?
Triggers, there are more and more. But sometimes, my analogy I always give is if I go to a restaurant and the steak's cold, suddenly I start to pick fault with the peas and the chips as well. And actually there was no problem with them. I'm just now picking fault. But we do look early on that once upon a time we used to celebrate agent growth. Now we look at it suspiciously, which
Mm,
I think is incredibly untoward, but we have to, I guess, protect ourselves from a compliance perspective. But we're looking everywhere. The difficult part from an institutional perspective is we now have so much data coming in. We're not always sure which data to trust. We have, reports that are centrally shared that are 18 months old, which give an indication of what happened a long time ago. Then we have agent-specific reports. I remember years ago, I had a report from an agency in a particular country, I won't say their name, and it suggested that we had issues. And what we found when we looked at it is actually the issue belonged to that agency. Everybody was recruiting for a particular subject, but they weren't. But in terms of identifying issues, I think we're looking everywhere now. But that early intervention is protecting us, is protecting the student, and it's protecting the agencies. So I recently had a discussion with an agent partner where I said, look, your applications are hugely up in a high risk market. Can we have a close inspection? And once we did, it was understood that actually the pipeline is looking good because their own compliance procedures are incredibly strict and more strict than others. But I think it's good that we're having that discussion. But it is analyzing a lot of data in relation to not just agents, because that suggests there's a problem with an agency, but we look at it from a course perspective, we look at it from a country perspective, we look at it from a regional perspective as well. So we specifically look at high risk areas, but I wouldn't just say Pakistan or India. I would look at specific states within those regions. So I think there's an opportunity for us to have those early discussions in a very, very targeted way so that we can work with the agent and not suddenly penalize and block them from working with the university. And that's ultimately our aim when we go through adverse practices that happen in the market. But as I mentioned earlier about the positive spin, I do worry we're looking at too much in too many places, looking for problems. So we are also calling agents to celebrate where there is growth that was unexpected in low risk markets as well, because I think that's important too.
absolutely, Kev. And I think the key thing here is that universities, if they can, try not to have knee-jerk reactions to if they are potential highlighted gaps, because we need to become here from a constructive, supportive position. It could work both ways in some ways. Maybe the agency comes back and goes, well, actually, you guys, there's an operational gap going on here. And, again, it could be a two-way street in that sense. So in that side, we are partners in that sense of the word of we need to be supportive of each other and guide. And rather than just being finger pointing and say, putting about in a negative spin on things, we've got to be positive in that engagement and support. I think it's really quite key here. Conscious of time, already halfway through or past halfway through the session. I'm just going to move on to another question, and I'll throw this one to you, Tony, if you don't mind. So the next question we're going to look at on this is, what does consistency actually look like in practice? We're going to move on to that where there is consistency going on, and how is it in the real world, and how quickly can inconsistency become a concern? But first of all, let's look at the first part of this question. What does consistency actually look like in practice, and how quickly can inconsistencies become a concern potentially as well?
I'm going to come to your question, but I just wanted to quickly pick up on something that Kev said there, which is
Yeah,
because I
sure.
think
Please go for it, man. Please.
it's worth talking a little bit about. There's a trend emerging, I think, particularly as we move into this area of the AQF in the UK, and what we're seeing, and it will lead into your question somewhat, is we're seeing in some cases that institutions are looking at compliance and operational risk, and they're addressing that by reducing the number of agents that have a direct contract and pushing more agents into a sub-agent network. So institutions still want the student, but their perception is that if we have less direct agent relationships, then we'll have less of a compliance risk, and therefore, why don't we all just reduce the number of agents we work with? And I think that what that's doing is ultimately potentially increasing operational risk, because what we're seeing is that you're basically putting more eggs in a smaller basket, and you're forcing there to be more lack of transparency. And I think that's then reflecting upon what it really means for the agents, who in some cases are forced into a sub-agent relationship where they used to have a direct relationship. And when it comes to the consistency, really what they want to do is ensure that when they send in an application that it results in an offer, that is a decent offer that can convert into a place, and the place converts into a happy student that's enrolled on a course that has a great outcome. And of course, that's what everybody wants, right? Actually, weirdly enough, everybody here has the same win in mind, right? They all want a good student outcome. It's what's good for a healthy agency. It's what's good for a healthy agent and educator relationship. So when we talk about consistency, it's just about us being open and transparent throughout all of those relationships. And I think that we as a sector are potentially at risk of trying to do the right thing in the wrong way, and actually making it more difficult, because a lot of what I'm seeing at the moment, and I want to be quite frank and open about it, isn't student first. I think the idea of reducing agent networks by volume is not being done so that students have the easiest ride. It's putting the institution and its compliance risk at the heart of decision making. And I think that is having knock-on effects that lead into your question in terms of what does good look like. Because what does good look like is a student walking into an agent office, meeting with a highly trained counsellor who places them in the right course for them, who then helps them submit their application, get a student visa, get a great offer, and have a great student outcome. We all agree on that. And I think that we're potentially at risk of letting, compliance and doing the right thing get in the way of actually doing the right thing. So yeah, sorry to go on my soapbox a little bit.
No, 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 not at all. It's a really valid point. I mean,
But,
I can see
I
Kevin
think,
in the background. We're really listening in on
and
this.
I think
It's a big
that is
discussion
the real
point.
issue, isn't it? Yeah.
Kev, I don't know if you want to add anything at all on what Tony's
I
just said.
concur. When I first came into the industry, it wasn't volume based. It really was, you've got a budget, go and support a diversity objective at a university. And because of budget constraints, now everybody's chasing numbers. And I think to have a diverse agent network, it's incredibly important. We have agents in Japan that won't really send us many students, but they link to other opportunities for the university. So whilst contractually they may be known as an agent, they link to summer schools, they link to certain schools. So I think this approach of, if you don't recruit 5, then we can't work with you and I completely agree with Tony here. And so we've taken quite a broad approach in that our team have essentially justified and gone through some of their agent partners. And many, I'll be honest with you, many don't recruit, but they link to government, they link to scholarship opportunities, they link to other organizations. So whilst by definition to a university in contractual terms, they're an agent, actually they're not by true definition an agent. And I think we need to be careful of, one size fits all, because sorry to use India as an example again, in India you've got 28 states. So if you don't have an agent in a particular state, already you need 28 different agents that have a local office in each of those states if you want to get diverse recruitment from India. So I agree with Tony in that driving down the number of agents have a significant risk, and actually what you end up doing is empowering and monopolizing an agent network. And what can then happen, and it's happened to me over the years, many years ago, mind, I had a particular agent that was doing very well for us in a particular market. He then came to me and said, I will repeat what we did last year for you, but you must give me X in commission. And suddenly the university had to make a conscious choice between recruiting outstanding students. They were all brilliant, but it was becoming unaffordable and unsustainable. So I think it's important that we spread that across an agent network to avoid scenarios like that, where I don't want to say empowering the agent, that would be improper, but to ensure there's I can't say the word now, monopolistic network within the agent.
I'm not going to attempt to say that word at this time in the morning, but yeah, I'm with you on that. I think it's a really good point. Sorry, Tony, please go on. It's okay.
No, I was just going to say, just picking on what Kev said there, because I think we're at real risk here, right? In terms of you get to a point where it becomes commoditized. I mean, you mentioned there about things being driven by the volume of commission. And I also remember when everything was about driving diversity. I go back when one of our real challenges was ensuring that our student recruitment wasn't too lent into one particular market because we knew the student satisfaction on that course would be harmed if people coming from a certain country were just surrounded by people from the same country. They'd ask themselves the question, why did I bother leaving home? I could have done this course at home. So there was such a drive towards diversity, and I think that was completely in the right direction. Everybody, as you mentioned there, everybody was looking to get as many agents in as many markets as possible, so we could get as rich and diverse a cohort onto our campuses as possible. And I think that was a healthy place to be. And I think what's happening now, and we're seeing it in the government policy in the UK, we went from let's recruit 600,000 students and let's get a volume of students into the UK to now let's promote T&E. And I think we're at risk of having a situation where certain high visa refusal markets are pushed towards a T&E offering and low refusal markets are being invited more to have an on-campus experience. So we've then got a two-tier offering, which I don't think is anybody's intention. So we've got a two-tier offering and we're pushing more and more people into a sub-agent network. And I think that is unintended. I don't think that's healthy for the sector. And I think that, I, for one, want to promote the idea of rich, diverse, professional agent networks, giving us a rich, professional student cohort, because I think it's the right thing to do.
Here, absolutely. We can't say much more on that. Absolutely perfectly put, Tony. Thank you. Just on that last point, then, and I just want to pick out that particular part of the question before I move on to one of our final questions is what does that consistency actually look like in practice? Let's go back to that framing of consistency with, operations. Where do you see, and we'll go to you on this, Kev, first, what does that look like in practice, do you think, from the agent side of things in terms of that consistency?
Service, service, service. That's
Perfect.
what we get after. That's it. And we must, remember that our students are customers, our agents are customers, and we need to ensure that we support their needs. And I'll make the reference on whatever communication channel they prefer. And I'll give you an example of what we did recently at UWE, because I think this was an example of brilliant best practice. The visa block in Myanmar. Suddenly, we've got 150 offer holders with nowhere to go. The communication was created to send out to the students to say, basically, that's the end. You can no longer come to the UK. So we came together, had a discussion. We contacted our partners in Malaysia, our partners in Vietnam. We contacted agents in Thailand to pivot the message of doom and gloom to say, what are the opportunities for these students? So we went above and beyond, and the response in the end was, whilst we can't facilitate here, there's these other 5 options. Let's work with you. So whilst there's no income for the university directly, whilst they're not coming to campus, I think what that showed to me is the consistent support for student outcome, irrespective of the loss of business. And I was quite proud of what the team did there, because I think it was just absolute genius to say, no, but here's 3 yeses. So I'm going to use the word again, it's the consistency in our communications, it's the speed of our communications, but also it's the accuracy. I think to send out incorrect or wrong offers is wrong, but also I think agents accept that sometimes things do go wrong. And I think it's the communication around, if something is delayed, to send a holding reference, just to say, hang on a sec, we are looking at it. We've got something happening over here. We'll get back to you in a couple of days, because then in turn they can manage the student expectation. So it just comes back to consistency, accuracy, and communication. And when I speak to agents, that's all they want. Quick offers. But when I speak to the boss, all he wants is quick commission. So we're working on that back with you as well.
I can think of it. I can think of a very good product which we can relate to, SAMS Pay. But on that point, Tony, just over to you on that one. Where do you see that sort of? What does that consistency look like for you in terms of that practice?
I think we all know that the idea of capture the data, secure the data, manage the data in a correct way. You can get students now that you might meet at a student fair, and they may then submit an application online. They may then walk into an agent's office. They may decide halfway through they're also going to do a WhatsApp call with a different agent. And before you know it, they've come through 2 different platforms. They've done a UCAS application. And the poor admissions office is looking at it saying, this same student's applied to us 5 different ways, 5 different times. We've got their data in multiple systems. We're now sending them 4 emails, 3 social media things. We're talking to them on WhatsApp hoc, and it's like, we've all seen that happen. So I think, being as operationally effective and as efficient as possible also stops channel conflict and starts to get the student into a managed state as they go through that. And sometimes with students, they're not only doing this for one school through one application. Obviously, they're sometimes holding multiple offers in multiple markets, so they're getting different messages from the UK than they're getting from Canada, from different schools, and they've got to navigate all of that. And
Mm.
so, and I think this all then comes back to what Kev says, which is service, service, service. Basically, from the time they first meet you, put them in front of a trained counsellor, guide them, help them, put them on the best course for the best outcome, and and manage the maze of data that we have to in between.
Here, here. And speaking of data, I'm going to move one eyes on the clock here. I want to definitely want to move on to this question because I know all three of us are very much of the tech side and data and digitized side. Good question. Big again. This can go to either whoever wants to jump in at any stage. Is what ways does digitization improve operational continuity during staff changes or high volume periods? So we've already touched upon that aspect of staff changes, but again, how does and what ways does digitization improve operational continuity during staff changes or even high volume periods? Anyone jump in?
I,
Tony
I,
or Kev?
I'll jump in. Kev will have a better answer for this for me because he's closer to the cold than I am. But and I think it's to a point what Kev was saying earlier. You may have a great counsellor that you employ, and they may have decided that they're going to start really nice personal conversations using their personal WhatsApp with every student in the pipeline. If that counsellor gets sick or leaves your employment, they walk out, they take all of those conversations with them, and you've got no record of them. It means
Absolutely.
that might have felt like high touch personal service, but ultimately it's not well managed data, it's not a well managed process. So I am an advocate for everybody using professional systems, professional CRMs, capturing the data, manage your reputation. Digital is difficult, but it's also a differentiator, and it's there for the power of good.
Absolutely. I hear that all the time when I deliver demos on our CRM product. The amount of times I hear owners say, and it's not down to the quality of service, like you say, it's you have a great counselor doing great work, but if there is no centralization of data and communication capture, then as you say, that all goes with them. And then where do you start from when picking up those great leads? Over to you, Kev, on this one.
Well, I love tech. I wish you could see my setup here. I've got a big, almost like gaming type setup with
Love it.
podcast, kind of cameras, but that's because I love technology. I'm not a podcaster, well, except for today. But I genuinely believe it's possible to get from application to CAS within 5 minutes. The technology's there. It's absolutely possible. The problem is connectivity between
Mm,
systems. And if I had the power, I would API out everything I could to interconnect, just to enable an agent to be able to click that apply button, boom, it's in my system.
yeah,
It's a shame the Myriad project shut down with UCAS because that would have been a potential solution that enabled agents to, all right, not apply directly, but enable one application to go out a bit like undergrad
mm,
applications. But digitization creates continuity, and I think that's really important. Some organizations use tools like Salesforce. Um, when processes, student records, and communications are captured centrally, it allows me to pick up your call when your counselor's out
when
the
your
office
counsellor's at the office
and
and
continue.
continue.
Oh,
Oh,
it's okay.
I'm
We're
not
just
sure if you
gonna
can see
I'm not
me.
sure if you can see
just
me.
please make sure your
Please make
mic
sure
and
your
camera's muted. I think
mic
that's you,
and
Sandeep,
camera's
there.
muted.
If you just
That's you,
get Mike
Sandeep,
muting
there. If you
your
just
mic, that'll be great. Thank you. There we go.
So what
Perfect.
it does, it allows us to ensure records are up to date, but we can focus on technology to some extent. But I do think what's really important and often undervalued is the relationship. So whilst from a technology point of view, we can give that continuity, so anybody can pick up the call from the parent or the student and find out at what status that is. I think the big issue with continuity is if a counsellor leaves, so does a relationship. They've taken time to build that relationship, often materializes into a friendship. And I think that that's forgotten about, but we can't fix that. That's life, that happens. But I think to have a centralized system that connects all the data, and I think I mentioned before, I read a book called Digital Operating Model, and it looked at University of West London for student dropout rates. All they did was connected all their information from library records to attendance records and everything else, and they managed to reduce dropout rates by something like 8 or 9%. And I think that could happen, or that the value of that centralized data will significantly help conversion as well. So I would love an all singing, and I'm looking at you here now, David, for a solution for this,
I'm
an all
sweating
singing
here.
data that allows a student and an agent to stay in one system throughout that entire journey, that gives them a dashboard at a top level, but also allows them to go through that journey from airport pickups to accommodation. But you did ask the question about continuity. That for me is it. Because as I alluded to earlier, it starts with an email, it goes to WhatsApp, it goes to social media. Nobody's got a true picture of what's really and fully happening with that student, other than the fact that they've just received their unconditional offer. Or, in fact, not that it was received, that it was sent, because that's what the records show. But I think there's a big opportunity there. So, whilst it's a challenge, it's a major opportunity.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'll see if I can get that on your Christmas wish list, okay? But we all just, that would be incredible. We all know that would be absolutely beautiful to have the all-in-one singing system. Tony, I'm going to throw this over to you, but I'm going to add in the last question to it as well, and you'll see why, because I'm conscious of time, but it does link together. Just going off what Kev was saying there, of course, focusing on how that continuity looks like, but more importantly, what practical steps can they take? What else can they do to reduce those risks as well? Are there any practical steps that agencies could take in reducing that potential risk, whether it is certain systems and particular methods? If you don't mind just answering that as well, and I'll go back to Kevin in a minute.
Yeah, obviously, I think that everyone should be looking at how they're managing data internally and digitization. If you're still working off spreadsheets and your data is not centralized, then obviously that creates a lot of operational risk. And I think it goes beyond that. I think having a digital policy across the business so that you are aware of what's happening on social media. You are aware if there are Reddit threads, I should say, that are talking about your agency in negative terms. And I think that, as we've been saying, throughout this chat, it's looking at every angle of your business where there's a digital touch point, whether that's handling transactions and fees. What does that look like? How are you sending student payments? How are you managing that side of the process? How are you ingesting and safeguarding student data? We're all aware that those kind of threats of everyone's at risk of being hacked more and data being used. We'll have all have seen instances where well-meaning students have put posts on social media that expose their own data. And I think you need to be aware as well of the rules and regulations of where you're sending a student. You may not be in a market that's covered by GDPR, but there may be an expectation of your partners that you understand GDPR, that you understand the risks that they are at under GDPR. So, I think it all comes down to being able to manage that risk. And, it comes down to advertising as well. When you're doing your social media marketing, what might seem okay when you're promoting a Canadian institution where migration is very much part of the offer will not be okay when you're promoting a UK institution where migration is a very sensitive subject. And if you're seen as putting up a TikTok video that talks about all the great, outside of study work opportunities there are, that may be socially, it may be kind of slightly insensitive to the market you're sending to. And it may well be that, that if the compliance officer of that university is looking at your TikTok feed, that they're not going to find those ads particularly appealing. And so we just need to be, I think, quite deploy a lot of empathy when it comes to the many faceted parts of digital, whether that become the data management, whether that be the social media marketing, whether that be managing our own reputation and risk.
No, absolutely. And I'm getting conscious of time here. Kev, do you want to add anything there before I go to the audience for any questions? Thanks,
Yeah, I
Tony.
think really interesting points around marketing, because the only person that would be aware of marketing requirements and branding guidelines would probably be the agency owner that signed the contracts. That's the only place they're normally shared. So I think to address those issues, it would be an open discussion, but that's where the connectivity to a marketing team would be incredibly useful. But in quick response to what practical steps would be there, I think in-house agent standardized training and records, so you know which members of your staff have completed which training. I think at the same time for universities, it's not standardized training. It's tailored training to ensure it appeals and is appropriate to that market. And again, India as an example, our survey showed that the response from students in the north are very different to the south. So therefore, what we shared in our training was completely different, although we're talking about the same sorts of programs. I think for me, implementing a CRM or a tracking system in some way, I know smaller agencies wouldn't necessarily have the budget to create a clear roadmap of what that student journey looks like, that we can then discuss with the agency and say, oh, you know what? Within our automated journey, this is what we do. Can our journeys complement each other? So I think it's sharing those roadmaps and working together to ensure that we're avoiding duplication between the efforts that we're making to support that student to either the UK or our particular university.
Absolutely, Kevin. I'm so glad you mentioned student journey because whenever I deliver demos of our product, SAMS CRM, I always pivot towards the student journey. So I show the work, it's all about workflows, and I always show the spine of that workflow, which is the student journey. And look, we are very much like-minded in terms of we'd love to have everything API. It'd be incredible. Everything flows, it's quick, it's efficient. But even if you can't API into full institutional systems, etc., then at least have that student journey mapped out, have it structurally centralized with oversight, with input and the ability to provide that good quality service via system. So absolutely 100% concur on that. I've just posted in the chat for the guys on the call because we've only got less than 5 minutes left of any questions they've got here. I'll just throw some here. Sham in the background. If there's any particular questions that have come through and I've overlooked, please post in the chat. And please do go ahead. Is this only for UK institutions, Nalia? No, this is for all around the world in terms of what we're talking about here. So it's all relevant to any market, as we mentioned. This is all international in that sense, although we do have UK guests on from the university sector for each month. ECC Canada, yeah, it says here agents should be responsible to their own actions, school responsibility to let the agent know the agents of schools policies as well. So again, maybe the clarity and also an open transparency there would be key. While I'm waiting for questions to come through, I might have one here. Just bear with me a sec, guys. Yeah. So we've got one here. Even if this is for you, Tony. Even if an agent is highly skilled, well trained, and has completed a program like ITAC and BC training, why does ISEF require 3 university references?
So this came about a while back when we found that there were certain agencies that had started to acquire private schools, particularly in Canada. So basically, you could have an agency who, through relationships through the business, was able to provide its own school references and things like that. So we needed to make sure that we're trying to hold very, very high standards. So those agencies that hold ISEF accreditation, you should be proud of that, and you're in quite highly esteemed company. We've had 8,000 applications for that, and I know that the bar is very high, but it's at a time when we're working very, very hard, I think, to ensure that there is confidence in the agent marketplace, and it's being shaken all the time. We constantly hear news media about bad agencies and bad actors, and it tires me, to be honest, because the vast majority of agencies that we work with are incredible people that put student at the heart of what they do. But and so in answer to your question, that's why I'm sorry the bar's high, but it's there. It's there for a reason. By all means, reach out to me on LinkedIn if it's for a particular reason behind it. If there's anything I can do to help, then I would.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Tony Franson there. I'm so conscious of time, and I think the questions are going to start coming in a minute. But if we don't, again, we can continue this discussion maybe, as Tony said, maybe via LinkedIn or another session we can set up. But and we'll have to close up shop soon. My colleague Sham, if any particular questions come in and we can quickly post it to the team, please just put it in my chat here. Yeah, some really nice feedback coming here as well. This is really good. Just a final word then, guys. Kev, Tony, any final words before I do my little closing speech and wrap things up today?
I mean, for me, it's a commercial one. So basically, we are working very hard to invest in this at ISEF. We talked a lot about training. Obviously, at ISEF Academy, we've trained 150,000 counsellors. We want to help with training. We've just launched the US course, which we're not making any charge for. We're here to help agencies. The Train Your Agent platform that we've put in place so that universities can train their counsellors is also available for agencies that want to use that to train counsellors internally. The due diligence platform that we've put in place will be working with agents to make sure that their profile on there is clean and up to date. So yeah, just as a commercial message to say that we are doing everything we can to help the agent marketplace with this particular issue.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. The platforms are fantastic for myself, so please check them out or reach out to Tony directly. They are brilliant. Kev, any final words from your side?
Repetition. It's to summarize to say that we're partners. We're in this together. So if there's any ambiguity, reach out to me or whichever university you're working with, and seek clarity. I saw a comment around marketing. We do share that, but I've made a note here that often some of the communications are hidden. And it comes back to stakeholders because that will often go to the agency owner, it will go to maybe a branch manager, but it may not filter down. But when in doubt, ask the question. There's no such thing as a stupid question, and we are in this together. So, in summary, give us a call, and let's talk it through because we want to influence and support your marketing campaigns, to ensure they're compliant and to ensure that the end user, the student, is getting the correct messaging to ensure we manage expectations. And I think that's really important that as a student-centric institution, that messaging is key, because we don't want them to be misguided, manage their expectations, and ensure everything that you've promised, we then deliver the moment they step off the plane in the UK. And the one thing I can guarantee when they step off the plane in the UK is it might be raining or it's definitely going to be colder from the country they're often coming from. But ultimately, give your university a call, send them an email, just keep in contact. That for me, that bilateral dialogue is the most important thing you can do.
Here, here. And I will just add to that as well. I think we all talk about digitisation and the amazing platforms and systems we use, but like you said, just start with a conversation. Don't be afraid to chat to that partnership or whoever's at the front of that partnership or whoever that colleague is at that partnership on the other side. Start the chat, have the discussion. We're all like-minded. We all want to work together to provide the best student journey experience as possible. But yeah, absolutely agree. And on that note as well, just to wrap things up here, thanks everybody for bringing the session here today. Huge massive thank you to Kev and Tony. Kev, I know you've logged in there from Thailand and it's late in the day, so thank you so much indeed. And Tony as well, thank you as always for the great support and insight as well and providing that sort of insights and experience from your side as well. And also everybody who's contributed and joined here today. So today's discussion really highlights the operational risks. Doesn't just typically come from major issues. It could be from all over and how simple aspects such as just communication and just opening channels and working together will hopefully improve sort of reliability aspects and strengthen partnerships. So do definitely start those conversations with your partnerships and internally as well. As always, our aim from the SAMS Global webinar series is to provide the practical and sector relevant discussion, and we will continue this next month. So please keep an eye out for our next month's session, where we are going to focus on sub-agent network and discussing that in a bit more detail. So keep an eye out for my emails on that and the promotion of it. At the same time, hopefully this is all recorded fine, and then we'll get a recording of this session out to you as quickly as possibly can. But thanks again, and Kevin, Tony, some great feedback coming from the chat as well. So we really love the session. So thank you very much for your insights. For now, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday and your evenings, your afternoons, your mornings. It's lovely to see you all again and hopefully see you again next month. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Kev. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks.
All the best. And a big thank you for Sham in the background and Hamid as well for helping out. We really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. All the best. Take care now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Cheers, Kev. Cheers, Tony.